Nora is asking what would be the first step of a tester in DevOps. Not sure if we've covered this elsewhere, but what's the first step of a tester in DevOps?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, so I think a really important thing to realize in approaching DevOps is that testing's already there. It's just like in the. It's funny. It's funny to call it classical DevOps literature, but in internet years, it is like 1,000 years old, like 2009. So, in the classical DevOps literature, again, that's one of the unfortunate things of the history is like there's not really a concept of an independent testing team in there, and it can be a little off-putting. I think a way to approach it is to realize that when they talk about ops, like they're talking about testing. And that's a lot of especially in the absence of an organized testing team. A lot of that falls to ops. So especially because ops, and again, we're thinking 10 years ago. So I mean, ops is back then. I mean, ops is the one who gets the call when the CSS is weird, not dev, right? Just ops. Whatever happens in prod, ops gets paged.
Yep.
So ops in the sort of classical picture of DevOps has a lot more in common with a dedicated testing team than is immediately, than is maybe like highlighted. And, I mean, this is just sort of, this is how it got written. I mean, I was around at the time and I complained. People listened to me and I wasn't loud enough. And so there you go. Now we're all trying to kind of retcon. It really is. I mean, well, that's a software. We do a lot of retconning in software. Like for those not familiar, retcon is like a fandom word that means like you go back and write new fiction that makes like the stuff from before makes sense somehow, even though it's like kind of happy. So that's what we do with software architecture. Yeah, sorry.
So what would be the first step of a tester or an ops person if they're equivalent in DevOps? What is their first task?
I mean, they're not equivalent in that like the role. I mean, the day-to-day responsibilities are completely different. The way that they have to respond during the incident, though, whether that incident is like, hey, my computer's doing this is weird on my computer, or like, oh, production's down. The way that we have to respond to incidents is really similar.
Okay,
and you can see this from the Etsy Postmortems Guide, which was co-authored by somebody who's a community manager and spent a ton of time triaging production issues from the consumer side at Etsy. Okay. So even that is there's a lot of what we think of as testing knowledge in there. In terms of first steps, I mean, I joked at the beginning that they say everybody has an accidental journey into testing. I think that one of the serious reasons that we say that is that things like heuristics and value as an abstract concept, quality as an abstract concept, taste making, these are things that testers have to do, and those are things that at least in the country I live in, those are things that nobody really knows how to teach, and like we don't necessarily put a whole lot of emphasis on teaching it, and so you just sort of I think the first step is to be lucky and to wind up having that kind of broad understanding of how things actually work in a technologically driven society, and to be able to have an interest in thinking critically about those things. That's and then learning to code as we're constantly complaining about online now. I mean, learning to code is trivial. Anyone can write code. It's like what I said before. I mean, it's like anyone can deploy code. It's making the site not fall down. It's like the hard part. Anyone can write code. Yeah. Anyone can, and it's not just anyone can write code. Anyone can write code that does the thing that they want it to do if given enough time. Anybody can do that. It's just because code is regular and documented, and so the hard part is knowing what to do with code. And being able to code is certainly a part of the DevOps movement. I mean, just sort of like infrastructure as code, CI as code, production as code, serverless, where like the code is code. The transformation of everything into code is really important because code is the lowest effort way to get things done on a computer.
So does that mean a tester's first step is to understand, not necessarily to write, deploy a line of code to production, but are you saying that the first thing they should do is try and get a technological grasp of what the system is that they're looking at?
Yeah, I mean, I think building a mental model, and I think this is one place where Agile QA gets it right for 20 plus years, is like those mental models are everything.
Okay.
And this is another place where we overlap with ops, and also we really, really almost completely overlap with security. Building those mental models of what the systems are and what they do is absolutely critical to being able to think critically about those systems. And the mental model that a tester builds, because testing is multidisciplinary, where development, for instance, or ops is not. The mental model that someone in a tester role is able to build is going to be different and a lot richer in terms of the things that you need to know, for instance, in incident investigation and mitigation and prevention, which, as I see it, are big value adds. It's going to be a lot deeper, and so that's in the anecdotes that I think I assume we all hear about when tell me about a time when QA worked, or like when testing was great. Like it's always that I sat down and I talked to this person who was from this other testing team, and like they gave me this insight into what I was doing in my development work that I didn't have, and then I was able to just like proceed in like a much more sophisticated fashion. That comes from having that's because the tester has a strong mental model that they've built up over time. And I think you can see that a lot in all of the sort of aphorisms that float around online about, or just things people say in the discourse about, there's a big part of testing is knowing the customer, knowing the product. It's because you wind up building this mental model that includes the technical aspects, but includes them like embedded in a social context that, as a developer, I mean, it's not even like it's not like we get to ignore it. It's just like if you're a developer and you gotta fit all that tech in your head, you just don't have bandwidth for it. It's just not. There's a reason why. There's a very strong reason why independent testing has existed so long and continues to exist, and it's because there's more to testing than anyone could possibly do on the side.
Right.
So, but. Yeah, I mean, I think being able to read code is incredibly important. I mean, I think only being able to look at the front end of an application is really limiting.
Right.
So just being able to read logs, being able to read the bits of code that one can see while testing an application. Yeah, I mean, that's critical. But as long as somebody comes to it with the mindset, which like I said, I mean, I think you just have to be lucky to acquire. Then the code is literally just a matter of reading the spec and asking questions.
Okay, thank you, Nora. I hope that answered your question. So it sounds like we've got to work on our mental models for that one.